Hi, I'm Lynton, and I've grown to love data. Well, appreciate anyway. Accountant by trade, data crept up on me. I was in a role that had to look at hospital level data. It wasn't a baptism of fire, where we had to actually work out how much each single episode cost to provide funding to states, territories, and the Commonwealth. And hospital level data, and Sam might talk about the complexities of that shortly, but our experts may get into that as well. Very intense. And for me, it was a real baptism of fire, but something I've kept with during my recent years. I certainly over the last 4 years. So I've been a senior public servant managing hospital funding. Now I'm on a board of a large hospital in Victoria, the Alfred. And also on the board of APRA, which just a tip, if anyone's going to get some cosmetic surgery, go to a plastic surgeon, not a cosmetic surgeon. So all day at board meetings today, that we've been four-cornered. So some of us were suggesting that might be just, again, getting to that point. But we have experts here to talk to us about the past 4 years. It's been quite a journey, particularly with the data-rich environment that COVID's provided us, but also the dynamic that's caused the industry and also the profession. But I'll go through our panellists. Susie Cluth is here. Dr. Susie Cluth is the Chief Data Officer of the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. Susie has extensive experience in data and analysis from previous roles as a physicist at the ANU, performing research for the CPI at the ABS, and building models at the Treasury as Chief Analyst at the Department of, building models at the Treasury, and as Chief Analyst at the Department of Social Services. As Chief Data Officer, Susie leads the delivery of the DESI data strategy through collaborating across the department to enhance policy development and program delivery by building data management and analytics capability to enable better use of data. Whether it's exploring a challenge in a policy area or understanding the regional impact of the program, trust in a robust evidence base is essential for providing the best advice or making decisions. And of course, this is one of the best things about Susie. Outside of work, Susie enjoys mountain biking and anything outdoors. So in the month, I'm about to head to Jindabyne and Krakenbach to do a bit of threadboat mountain biking. So Susie's okay in my book. Welcome, Susie. On the other side of the table, Heather. Sorry, ladies first. Heather has dedicated her career to finding innovative ways to improving governance and management of data in the Australian public service. Drawing on her background in psychology, Heather takes a people-centred approach to her practice. By focusing on the motivations and cognitive barriers, Heather works with her stakeholders to help them adapt their data behaviours and improve capability in a collaborative and supportive way. Very important. Heather has worked across the APS in agencies such as the AIHW, the ADS and Geoscience Australia in a range of data governance and management roles. She's currently the inaugural data governance specialist at the Australian Communications and Media Authority and is leading the implementation of ACMA's data governance management framework. Data governance and management framework. Heather is also the author of the Office of the National Data Commissioner's Foundational for Data Capabilities. An excellent document that is. I lecture in data as well, and I've used that as an aside, and led the co-design of the APS minimum metadata set for data asset registers. Heather has postgraduate qualifications in psychology, policy and applied social research, and is currently studying a Masters of Information Studies at Charles Sturt University. So welcome. Simon, you've got some tough competition here. You're in the middle of I know, I mean, and we have Simon. Simon Wall is an experienced data management professional working across numerous portfolios in the federal public sector. Simon has led data management transformation efforts at the ABS, the Department of Health, and is now the Director of Data Governance and Management at the National Library of Australia. Simon has a strong focus bringing together technical and business perspectives to develop holistic data strategy to meet complex organisational needs. Simon is a graduate of the ANU and the University of Canberra, an active member of the Dharma community, and a passionate advocate for high quality data management. Thank you, experts, and welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I've got some set questions that I'll probably start the panellists off, and I'll probably get, I'll start off with Susie, but also I would welcome questions from the audience. I'm happy to be interjected or for people to sort of raise their hand. You'll have to just speak clearly because we have a number of people who are joining us online, but please welcome any questions. So I'll start with Susie. Is there anything in your background that's given you a unique perspective on data management?
So I have worked in data for a long time, as you've listed already. I think the most intensive time was when I was working at Treasury, and building models. And so obviously to build models, we needed to use a lot of data. So that was probably the closest I got to data. And then when I was working at the Department of Social Services, I discovered integrated data through the Metadata data asset that's housed at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So for those of you who aren't aware of Metadata, it's joined up and integrated administrative data, and it's a fantastic resource. And so that really, having worked at Treasury and trying to solve difficult problems with data, to have this amazing asset on tap was really mind-blowing. And I think that's where data is going in the future, and I think it's sort of going to set the path for data management going forward.
Excellent. Your perspective, Heather?
So it's actually my background in psychology that's influenced my understanding and working in data management, and not because in psychology we part of the degree is working with statistics and research data. It's actually understanding people and their motivators, because although we're dealing with data management, data governance, it's actually people that we're trying to work in. It's behaviour change. And to change behaviour, you have to understand motivations, what's stopping people, what's making them scared of change. And so having a good understanding of people, how they work, how they operate, and how you can communicate with them and engage with them is really helpful when you're trying to change behaviours and run a change program, which data is a change program in the public service. You can't escape that.
It's a change program everywhere.
Yes.
It's never going to end or anything. Simon, your thoughts?
I guess once upon a time, I studied computer science, and that was really dry. But not long after that, I through some mishap or other, became a data modeler, and I was working at the Department of Finance, and I worked with a lot of business areas at the Department of Finance. It was business areas at the Department of Finance means people who are dealing with other government departments, talking about policy funding and so forth. And I remember having these conversations. You're running workshops with people, modeling things, and people would turn to you and they'd say, I've worked in this field for 30 years and I never understood the relationship between those two things before. And that's sort of like just unlocking knowledge in people's head, and then they were able to look at the data and they'd go, oh, look, and they could do real things with it. I remember working on an exercise where it was Department of Social Security, in fact, who were running numbers, for a policy proposal, and the Department of Finance had an extract, and because of the data model we had, we were actually able to get within about 1% answers in half an hour, whereas the department were taking a couple of days to run them. It was very powerful.
Excellent relationships, both with data and people. Good themes. Sticking with you, Simon, and it's a similar question. How do you think data management practice or process has changed over the last 4 years?
4 years, interesting time frame. Obviously, COVID happened. I guess I was working at the Department of Health and had been working at the Commonwealth Department of Health for about a year when COVID happened. And it was really interesting to see the way that before COVID, we were doing interesting things with data. We were trying to do innovation with geospatial data, for example, big deal for health, and improving their data warehouse in lots of interesting ways. And you sort of got traction, but you didn't really. It was like people knew it was important, but they weren't really putting their money where their mouth was, well, health. there's lots of money, but like, they weren't really embracing it. And then COVID happened, and all of a sudden, you know, the geospatial thing that we couldn't get any progress on for 12 months is suddenly like, oh, thank God. And I hope that into the future that lesson is going to come home to roost. That you know, when people say, hey, data, they go, you know, management go, oh yeah, that's right. That saved our bacon. We better do more there. You know, so sort of like actually seeing value is like emergencies focus your attention to seeing value.
Yeah, good. One for you, Heather. With your sort of background, what I've seen, I had the pleasure of working with real experts in data. I'm sort of just one of those people that enjoy the outcomes, but it seems to be that the data people, if I can call them that, the data experts actually understand what the organisation means, similar to what Simon had. All these different models that just need some time for senior executive attention. And something like COVID happens and snap, where is all of this? How do you think we can raise that awareness, or has there been a watershed moment now with COVID and that awareness is raised across the organisation, and that's where we should go, or organisations should go for their sort of intelligence?
Look, I think there's several layers to that. I think COVID and situations like that, before that, you probably all remember we had the terrible bushfires around the country as well, and data was really important for that as well, where the bushfires were going, where they'd come from, people who were in need, where were they located. So national disasters are really good for starting a big conversation about data and its importance and what we've got to do with it. And so that, you know, certainly shows the value. But I think for the last 4 years in the public service, and I can only speak for the public service because that's where I work, there has been momentum building about the importance of data. The 30 review, which is the review of the public service, has shown that we need to build our data capabilities. We need to do more with our data. The PC report, 2000, whatever that was, I think that was in the 4 years, showed the same thing. So there's talk about it happening. Which is really good. We're getting a conversation going, there's a narrative, but there's still a lot of blockers because the public service lacks resources to make a lot of change. It lacks the skills and expertise to make a lot of change. And there's so much expectation on us to do so much that there's only so much that can be achieved. So it's great that we've got a conversation starting about it, but there's other intervening factors that need to be taken into account if we really want things to move and change and data to be valued in the way that it needs to.
Okay, good response. Susie, one for you. When you see, like a lot of people talk data, but then don't necessarily understand what they're saying. So how have you seen, or how do you think organisations are changing that, a sense that what I'm sort of alluding to loosely is things like metadata? Like we all know data, but really do we really know data? Do you think organisations actually have a handle on the data that they have and they're managing it effectively?
No. So when I started at the Department of Education, Skills and Employment a year and a half ago, there was this urban myth going around the department that we didn't have very much data.
I just like to point out that urban myth just before that.
So anyway, so we built a data asset register. We showed them all the data assets that we have in the department, and so now that's changed, that perception. We had our executive are very excited about data. The thing that they're really excited about is being able to see people's journeys through their lifetime. So the longitudinal aspect of data, particularly, I mean, our department scans from all the way from childcare through the education sector and then into the employment sector. And that idea is really exciting to our executive. I think knowing the possibilities of the sorts of things you can do with data is a big challenge for non-data literate people, and working out what sort of questions data can answer. I think that's one of the challenges that we need to be addressing, and really understanding how to interpret and interpret data and what it means, and how to work with data effectively is a really important skill that I think the public service is working to build, but I don't think we've cracked the capability angle yet. I think we've designed courses to teach people data literacy, but we need to get more into that sort of hands-on capability building, and that's the sort of the next challenge I'd like to try and tackle.
The hands-on. So while you've got the floor, do you mean things like training? Because I think we could all rough out a good memo. But when it comes to data, people have got gaps in, what data is, their basic tools or specialist tools. What do you think will bridge the gap?
So I think raising our expectations of what we expect people to be able to do with data, because people really need to get that hands-on experience of working with data. And if they're not expected to work with it, they're going to, I don't want to touch legislation, right? Because that I find that challenging. And so we need to create fairly big incentives for people to actually actively work with data, and then we need to provide the support for them to be able to do that. So I think things like having data workshops where they can bring their data problems and solve them collectively is something I'd like to trial. We set up recently, we've done a sort of soft launch of a data support service where people can actually get in touch with our central data area, and if they've got questions about how to handle their data, they can do that. So they're getting, and the way we're running that is that we're not doing it for them, we're showing them how to do that and helping them out with the hard parts of it, so they actually do that and build a capability that way.
Awesome.
It's all early days, but
early days.
That's what I think we need to go. Yeah.
Simon, I'll go to you. And again, there's probably not a conflict of interest, but as always, everyone's got like 6 degrees of separation. So I was actually a CEO of one of the national bodies that the EDW that Simon spoke about supported, and they spent more than, Simon can disclose how much I think through 2012 National Health Reform, was it the Gillard, Rudd, Abbott, Turnbull. I didn't finish my 5 years as a holder of public office, and I've gone through 6 prime ministers, but it was a dynamic time. But I think they spent more on that EDW than some state health systems. A great piece of gear. I think, and I was on the board of this EDW, and I think we got in there about sort of 12 months in, 16 users. How do we bridge the gap to get? And I think they've got nationalised into the department. They made some really significant steps, but
yeah, I'm glad to say it has more than 16 users now.
Oh yes.
It's a real challenge because I remember talking to the data steward for Medicare data at Department of Health, and she'd been having a conversation with the National Health Funding Body.
Ooh.
And they said, this isn't being recorded. They said, why do you keep sending us duplicate data? She said, I'm glad you asked. We have never sent you duplicate data. And getting the enough understanding that these weren't actually duplicate records. If you have, if you go to hospital and you have to have 2 fingers stitched up, there are 2 Medicare records, 1 for each finger. If you have twins, there are 2 births. And somebody who didn't understand the data had been filtering the duplicates out. Because it looks like they're duplicates, same Medicare ID, same date, same service. You'd think they're duplicates, except when so getting the understanding of the data, sufficient understanding, so building that knowledge in people is hard. So on one hand, 16 users is bad. On the other hand, if the 16 users really understand what they're doing, that's probably a good thing. And there's that balance. I know in an agency I work at the moment, somebody came to me, they said, we're going to send estimates later in the week. This is the briefing note, Director General. Can you just check? And you go, for God's sake, can't say that, can't say that, can't say that. Because people get some data and they make some claims. But if you don't understand what actually the data actually said, there was a classic. It said, so National Library Archives Australian websites. We currently have something like, there's a lot of this stuff. There's about 15 billion digital objects on the stored at the library that would come from Australian websites. And somebody wrote down, we have archived 15 billion websites. Now, I don't have to be a genius to know that there aren't 15 billion websites in Australia or even the whole world. But if you don't have a good sense for numbers, if you're not numerate in that particular way, and this is a challenge for the Bureau of Statistics, and stats are Stats are leading a program of education. They've been doing this for a long time, but now it's all new and glossy, and everyone's paying attention, which is great. But actually, statistical thinking and statistical storytelling is a real skill.
That's why it's not just about data literacy or data fluency or data democratization. Like these things, we throw these terms around, but you actually have to unpack what they mean and what the implications are. So, I think your story there is a really good reason for why we shouldn't just be throwing data open out there and saying everyone should be using data and doing what they can with it. Because if you don't understand it, if you don't know where it's come from and what it means and why decisions are made, and we don't have that sort of provenance in our data and the public service on the whole, like we're asking for trouble.
Does everyone need to know that, Heather?
The people who are working with the data need to, and depends on how transparent you want to be. Are we an open and transparent government, and is the data we hold, should that be open and transparent as well? I think if we're publishing data, we probably should say where it's come from, what we've done to it, what we need to think about, take this into account as you are interpreting it and using it and taking it to Senate estimates or publishing it in the media.
I was just thinking about both what you said then and what Simon said. And it might have been the National Health Funding Body that I was CEO of, so I apologise.
Yeah, but no, you wouldn't have, but how would you know?
Yeah, no idea. All in here and no idea, I think we used to say. It was the NEW and then us. But wise people like Simon were around. So the first thing about data governance is really about, looking for those duplicate, old school data science, essentially. Even though I lecture in it now, I still talk about duplicate records. Press a button on Excel, it'll find it for you. How do you give confidence that those duplicates are not duplicates when you haven't got things like unique record IDs? Maybe you have in the Medicare data set now, but you've got your Medicare PIN certainly, but you don't necessarily have an episode number or something. How do you give that sort of governance comfort? And maybe to both, maybe to Susie. When I've been looking at things like data, someone walks out and goes, how many white electrical vehicles do we have in the fleet? And all you care about is going into the data set and going, fleet, whites, electric, 16, okay, onto the set of estimates, off you go. How deep do we need to get in relation to our governance structures? I've got a good one for you, Heather. So coming next. Simon, how do we get confidence in governance if duplicate the old techniques are no longer valid for good reason?
I think so I was talking about needing people who have good sense for what numbers mean and so forth. But the other end is important too. The who actually can work with the data, actually understand the data at a deep level. And we were in the process of the library establishing a data governance framework and identifying data stewards and so forth. And that is really important. We need to have identified experts. If we're working with this sort of data, if you're working with data, in our case, say it's about the library collection. If you're working with library collection data, you need to have somebody who is the authority on what it means, and they should be consulted. It's not just we wrote this briefing, off it went. It's like, have we actually done the right thing?
Are we getting to that point where we have lawyers, doctors, and data architects that have a protected term?
I think
or some.
I don't think we're there yet, but I think it's coming.
Susie, your perspectives?
So just to tap into what Simon was saying, I think this feedback loop between analysts and then data custodians is a really important thing that we are actively trying to develop. I mean, data interpreted in isolation is fairly dangerous. The other thing is obviously if you're doing work with data, you need to be setting up proper procedures around how you work with your data. So quality assurance systems need to be put in place, and I think that's where these feedback loops will come in. Data misuse of data is very easy to imagine, and I think that's the biggest fear that within our department for sharing. We've had some challenges with sharing data just within our department, and one of the biggest challenges was this exact issue that people were worried that their data would be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
And I've seen some departments where it's now the analyst's responsibility. The data steward's not your mother, not your father. You know, here's the information. If you go and, a bit like what happened with funding body and health, here it is, but you've got to work yourself out with the data, but you've got to make sure that there's some sort of safety net there to cover it off. Heather, we touched on with Susie about data sharing. Everyone's got the data, but then all of a sudden you want to, because I think there's a data accessibility and transparency bill / act.
Full disclosure, I've worked on this bill. I used to work at the Office of the National Data Commissioner. So
take
from that what you will.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, keep going.
So isn't it going here? So we still know it's good work. I think it's still in the Parliament.
Yeah.
We're going to start sharing across departments. What that act or bill means is if you haven't got mechanisms to share under the current legislation, that will give you an opportunity, and it also gives you an opportunity to access data that otherwise wasn't available. How do we get over the personal fear that, well, why do you want my data, Heather? What are you going to do with it? And then where does that custodian, that guardianship, that expertise end? Well, if you want it, Susie, or you want it, Simon, go crazy, but don't come to me if you delete all your records because you thought they were duplicates. What's that sort of secret to get the data flowing?
So the bill is not going to enable that. So I'll just say that loud and clear. And as custodians of data, and let's do some definitional work here while we're there. According to the bill, the data custodian is the agency that has responsibilities for the data. It is not the people, it is the agency as a whole, represented by an agency head. So I'm going to talk in those terms when we talk about custodians here. We can debate terminology later. The custodian should not be saying, go forth and do what you want with my data. That's terrible. The custodian should be asking, what do you want it for? What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it after you've got that? Are you deleting it? They should be asking these questions because that's looking after data, and that's what a custodian or a steward is. There's somebody that looks after something on behalf of someone else. As the Commonwealth, we are looking after data on behalf of the people, the plants, the infrastructure, the whatever we collect data about. We're looking after on behalf of something else. And so we aren't the owners, and we don't have the right to just do what we want with it. So we need to be asking these questions and continue it. And if that puts in a barrier to sharing, maybe not all data should be shared. It's not a free-for-all. If we're talking in the context of this legislation, it's not a data free-for-all, nor should it be.
But coming back to that custodianship, again, I'll use my example of the fleet car. What have I got? A 4-door sedan, manual, whatever it is. The fleet officer or the place you rent the car from, they don't ring you up 30 minutes in going, how's it going? Right, forgot to tell you, drive on the left-hand side of the road. So is there still a role for the analyst to bring something to this so that there is this trusted field? So I don't have to go back to the custodian necessarily for expert points, but not necessarily sort of broad, because essentially driving a car, I know the road rules. It doesn't really matter what car I jump into. I hopefully will reach
the road
safe.
rules for the state that you're in and that you've got your license for. The road rules here are different to the road rules in Tasmania.
Fair point.
And so if you're going to Tasmania, you'd be prudent to figure out what the road rules were there before you go do something.
It's actually a fair chance you know the road rules from when you got your license.
That's right. The old two back to the, I remember I rented a car to do a loop of, I can't remember that island in Hawaii, the small one. What is it? Where the Honolulu is. What's that island? Yeah, and I forgot to drive on the right-hand side for a while. But no problems whatsoever. Those Priuses are quite robust. So last question, I'll open it up to all the panel. I'll start with Susie first. And then we've got a couple of minutes for questions, so please get your questions ready. What areas or what area do you see becoming most important for public service data management in the future? And I'll be the same question for each of you before we open up to our lovely audience.
So I think, so we've talked about data sharing already. I think that's an important aspect, but the ability to join our data up. So I've touched briefly already on integrated data, but I think that is where we're going to get more and more gains from our data going forward. And so some of the sorts of things we need to be looking at is how compatible our different data sources are, and do they join up? And we've got a project that we're contributing to at the moment on metadata harmonization. So we're taking sort of 15 high frequency metadata components and looking at how they align and how
Got
to
an
get.
example just to bring life to it.
I think gender is one of the ones on the list. If you look at the definition of gender across the different data sets, it's the options for selecting gender are vastly different across all the different data sets. And so if you want to try and join two data sets together and you've got different definitions, you can't actually do that.
So things like
Even things like age, right? How do you define age? Is it age in years, or is it age? Is it date of birth and all that sort of stuff like that? So
yeah, I think it's really challenging. This is a great example, but I was just thinking then about gender versus sexuality. But even in gender,
You mean gender versus sex?
You've got intersex. You've got 46 different classifications of anywhere from male to female. But we just then go to one. It's fascinating. Simon, your thoughts? Most important
I think
areas.
I think the thing that we need is to move from hype to reality.
Yeah.
With everyone's going, data, it's wonderful. But we know there's lots of hard work to do, and increasing appreciation of that hard work and the need for it. And you can't get answers overnight. And if we collected the data the wrong way 20 years ago, it's never going to get better. It's what we've got. So making assets for the future would be a very good thing. So you're doing it better for the future. That's right.
Awesome. Heather?
Do you remind me what the question was again?
Yeah, well, you're right. What did we say?
Right. What areas do you see becoming most important, or that what area do you see becoming most important for public service data management into the future?
I'm going to stick with my narrative and say it's the people. We're dealing with people, and I find that there is a lot of divorced conversation about working with data, managing data. We're actually managing people and we're governing people.
Mm-hmm.
Because the data will exist whether the people are there or not, and it'll sit in systems whether the people are there or not. The systems can't fix anything. They can help, but they can't fix anything. And so we need to put more emphasis on the people and the importance of the people and bringing them along on a journey.
And is that all people, or is it data people? It's everyone.
Look, at ACMA, we are looking at enterprise-wide all people. Everyone has a touch point with data in a different way, therefore they have a responsibility to look after that data. So there's not one steward that is the authority on the data, because people do different things with data and have different responsibilities to it depending on what their role is with it. And so yeah, it should be, if not all the people in the agency, it's a vast majority of them. And it's a different way to approach it. But if there's one steward, does that mean anybody else who touches the data has no responsibilities? No.
So I said before, we were in the process of implementing a data governance framework. We've got some data principles coming. The executive hasn't signed off on them yet. But principle number one: we are all data people.
Exactly.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It impacts everyone. And almost coming back to the first question about your unique perspectives and what makes the difference. At this point, I'll invite any questions from the audience. Got a couple of minutes.
So we've got one online. The question here is: how is the public sector planning to incorporate consent management at the people level for the captured, manipulated, data captured and manipulated by government agencies?
Which panelists would like it?
Well, you can't get consent from corroboree frogs or wallet pines, so let's not pretend that all government data is about people. So there is no global consent situation for government data because it's not all about people. Look, I could glibly say, when I'm at accident and emergency and I'm bleeding to death, the last thing I'm going to care about is someone saying, do you consent to the government using your data in this way? Controversially, we're all taxpayers and we have taxpayer-funded services that we use. So are we not, through using these taxpayer-funded services, consenting for the government to use our data? Consent's a really nice idea. It's not always practical, and it doesn't solve everything either. So it's not the silver bullet.
Yeah, I agree with you. Though I think we need to think, well, governments in the future need to think very carefully about how data collection frameworks are drafted. You know, imagine back in the early 80s when they were implementing Medicare, if they'd said, you know what, all data of Medicare is now the government's property. There's no consent issue here. If you use Medicare, we're going to use your data for research.
Like buying something at Woolies or when.
Yeah, it'd be like buying something at Woolies, right?
Yeah.
You know, if we drafted the legislation differently, we'd be in a different situation with that
Just need
data.
to put a frequent flyer point on a government data.
But you know, at the same time, I've sat on data access request queries panel at Department of Health, and you know, you look very, very hard at the work that's been done by ethics groups, and you know, what is this data being used for, and is it reasonable to expect that consent could be obtained for this data? These people, I don't know. This is suicide data. There's no consent possible.
It also ties into these ideas of the right to be forgotten, which is a big thing in the GDPR. And in our context, it's assuming that we can actually find an individual in a data set and reliably delete them from it. I don't have that faith for a lot of people.
That's a good point. Is there another question? Because I've got one.
Oh, there's one more online. Wouldn't data governance incorporate considerations larger than just data quality fixes?
Yes.
Such as data value as an organisation perspective, top down.
More than data quality, I think so. Susie, your thoughts? Pull it out.
I would hope so, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, we've been drafting our data governance framework, and it's much more, it's much broader than just data quality. I'm trying to think what's in there.
A lot of good stuff.
The good old Dharma circle, data governance.
That's right.
They've got all that little thing.
But even then, data management, data governance, you get all that confused. It's a complex space. Any final questions?
I have one feeding on from that, around that sort of the issue of, I guess, granularity of people's consideration of what data skills constitute a role. In terms of, you mentioned earlier, you know, are architects going to have a certification, you know, ranking similar to, you know, doctor in terms of, you know, industry recognition and a set level of competence to be expected. I feel like at least some of the problems in the public sector at the moment stem from that lack of granularity. If you're hired as a data person, you're expected to be an analyst, a data governance expert, somebody who knows how to use Excel, like
everything. You are pretty much describing my job.
Yeah, that's right. You know data. It's like a person at the barbecue. You know.
Oh, that's one for him.
Yeah.
The question I had was like around the data professional stream and the APS, like, and potentially integration with things like Dharma. Like, how can we get more certainty in the description of what we're doing? And how those
specialties.
Yeah, how those combine up into the roles we're doing, and get people to understand what that is.
I'm just going to jump in feet first because so recently I was doing some training for CDMP. You know, DMBOK compared to you know 10 years ago, DMBOK is on and everyone lives these days. And I got my CDMP certification a long time ago, and we finally worked out how to recertify it. So I'm in the process of doing that at the moment. But it was really interesting to see the other people on the course, because 10 years ago, when I was doing CDMP, you know, there were like 5 of us in Australia. It was like, it was, and like 4 of us in the room, sort of. Yeah, and we're all here today. Apart from that, you know. So you know, you're a certain sort of person. Whereas on this training, Tim was actually running some of this training. So anyway, but you know, in the audience for this training was quite diverse, and some of them it was like, oh my God, what's this topic that I've got to know something about in order to pass the exam? And I was talking to a friend about it afterwards. He said, you know, it's like becoming a doctor. You know, they have barrier exams. You can't become a doctor if you don't pass this subject. You're not going to never going to have to know anything about it again. But if you haven't done this, you can't become a doctor. But I think it's a fair point that you've got to do specialisation exams for CDMP, but they're not visible afterwards.
No.
You're just a certified data management professional, and there are subspecialities. You don't hire a data modeler to be a data security expert. Those are different things, and perhaps in the future we might get some specialisation.
There's complexity of the field.
Yeah, recognition of the specialisation.
Like surgeons used to be example of their cosmetic and plastics.
That's right. Yeah. Or before that, I'll cut your hair and I'll take your spleen out.
They're a haematologist and they're a plastic surgeon.
That's right. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So let's thank our panel. Heather Riley. Thank you very much.
While we wait for this to kind of get sorted, I wanted to thank everybody and thank Dharma and Andrew especially for inviting us along today. For those of you who don't know, last Tuesday was Aristotle Metadata's 4th birthday, which is why we're kind of focusing on 4. So 4 years ago today we were founded, and we're going to see a nice little timeline. And I thought it might be nice, I'm just watching here to make sure everything's going well. I thought it might be nice to sponsor Dharma and bring together a group of panelists that I thought would have some very interesting kind of understanding of what's happened over the last 4 years, because from my perspective, kind of starting and building up a data company, things have changed dramatically, not including the word that we all know, COVID. Everybody loves to use it now. We'll move through them very quickly because I think a lot of people know us here. Yeah. Okay, groovy. So that's where we've come from. So this is like a really abbreviated timeline of what we've done, and you may not understand behind the scenes what goes into building up a data company from scratch in Canberra. We started in 2017, and we've kind of just continued to kind of slowly kind of steamroll behind the scenes, continuing to expand not only what we do here in Canberra at a federal level, but at a state level and at an international level as well, kind of continuing to drive this standards-based approach to data. I carefully selected some of the people who are here today because I've worked for a lot of them, or I work with a lot of them currently, and the approach that we've constantly tried to take is getting everybody to talk the same language. Because I think, like Heather and Susie were saying, it's about people communicating this stuff effectively together. Like if we are all understanding things in the same way, that means that it's easier for us to interpret data in the long term. What I wanted to do is just quickly run through what that's actually meant for the public sector. Because you may not be aware that we started working with the Department of Social Services almost on day one. So we effectively opened the doors and have been working with government since we started, trying to build up an understanding of data across the entire public service. And this is a really great example, and I won't read through everything because it's we want to get to the social networking bit. But the idea is we've continued to grow through people continuing to get on the platform and start building a cross-government understanding of data. So I think Geordie was asking a question about this whole of government metadata kind of sharing framework. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is through bringing together large multiple groups onto the Services Australia registry to build this understanding of what data they're collecting and where it's moving through. So that as new data users come on, they can see an instant understanding of what that data means. We understand what a person is, we understand what an event is, we understand why a Medicare event is recorded twice. And it starts to become really useful. For those of you who haven't seen us, I guess the thing that we want to talk about is we want to help people understand the pain that they've kind of gone through without realizing it. And the pain comes from how much we have to go through email and document to kind of get people to feel what that data is. Has anybody lived through that experience of sending off an email to request some data and try and understand what that means and get bounced around to 3 different people, or never get a response because it disappears into the void? Yeah, I'm seeing lots of nods. That's what we're trying to resolve here, and that's what we're doing really effectively. Is like what our people said earlier, it's about people management, it's about change management, about understanding why everybody needs to be involved in this. It's data from my perspective, coming from a very numbers heavy and from a computer science heavy background, similar to Simon, is really around, it's not the whole picture. It's about words, it's about people, it's about concepts to describe what we're doing. And that's what we're effectively doing, is building a centralized place for everybody across the organization. Everybody comes here. And again, with that DSS example, we're starting to see 500-600 active users who come to this platform to understand what their data means. I'm going to quickly run through like a couple of those user stories because I've got the floor. So I'm going to do that. Sponsor the drinks. So. But I think it's really useful to kind of help us understand who these people are, right? Because again, we kind of get locked in our own little data world. And what I've been able to do over the last 4 years is understand all of these conversations that people have to understand what they're trying to achieve. And the biggest one is just that, what is the data? Like, what is this data and where does it live and how can I access it? Becomes really important for a lot of people. The next big one is that holistic view from that executive level that I kind of showed. And it's talking about, is it actually fit for purpose? Are we at least driving people towards the standards? I've taken a very, very pragmatic approach with how we kind of deliver this to people and said, it doesn't need to be perfect on day one. One of the biggest principles is just to do it, just write it down, because your interpretation is probably just like the closest that we've got to the best there is. If you tell me what your interpretation is, at least that's a start. And this is what drives us towards those quality standards. Again, it's understanding how we classify data. And again, I think this was talked about earlier, is how do we break down these different categorizations of what data means? The idea of big statistical classifications isn't numbers. It's about concepts and meanings. It's about how do we break these terms down and do it in a way that people can kind of understand and search through at a later date. It's not an Excel spreadsheet. It's a wiki. It's driving people towards that understanding, going, what is a car? What is a hybrid car? What is a manual car? Is the idea of a manual car going to change in 5 years' time? Because, we've got a self-driving car. Do I drive a manual car that has an automatic gear shift? Like, how are people going to kind of change and understand that? And lastly, it's bringing together developers as well. And I think this is probably one of the things that's nearest to my heart, is making sure that everybody who's trying to integrate with this data understands what it means effectively. And those are the big 4 stories that I've kind of heard us talk about in data management over the last 4 years, is how do we make people want to be involved in this? Right, that's what we're trying to drive this for. Is data as numbers, I think, is an idea that needs to go away. Data as concepts is what we need to understand, because it's that which we can use to draw inferences out of it. So to that end, I want to talk about 2 big initiatives that we've got coming up in early 2022. And this, I think, talks to people from the panel talking about, how do we trust that people know what they're doing, and how do we trust that they know what they're saying? And I think that the big one here is, like, I've actually started to study my CDMP. So I am going through that process. But my biggest disappointment is that metadata occupies such a small percentage of that pie. And even that word is starting to become very, very scary for a lot of people across the public service, because it's overloaded with terms. Is it the telephone number? Or I saw an article about the metadata the other day, and which made me question, is that metadata? And it's like, this incorrect usage of terms is really challenging. So what we're looking at here is not Aristotle training, but it's about bringing that best practice training that already exists, or bringing that best practice knowledge to the forefront to help people understand data management, not from the perspective of, is it a good database design, which is a very heavy important thing, but are we helping people record that effectively? Are they doing their job throughout their entire career and writing this content down? The second big thing that we're doing is we're also developing a partner program. And I think this is really important for Dharma, because again, it goes hand in hand with these 2 things. And it's really important for the public service and for Dharma and for our consultancies here in Canberra to understand how this works for everybody's benefit. What we're looking at here is a way for us to provide that flexible skill set across Canberra, across the Canberra ecosystem, so that departments know that there are people out there they can work with who can instantly use these tools immediately to fill those stop gaps. Like, are they able to use tools like Aristotle and have the backing of knowledge to use it effectively? Yeah, so those are our biggest two things. And I like doing this. It's really, like, I don't care. I'm going to do this one. I like making fun of these things. Like, we're here for a joyous occasion. I have one more thing to announce, right? So if anybody's had a sneak peek at the cookies, we're actually here to announce something really interesting and cool, right? So this is a brand new thing that you're going to start seeing, and I hope that you're going to start seeing it everywhere that you see in Aristotle. And it's talking about something that everybody was talking today. It's a very similar graphic. It's around data requests. You know, this idea of how are people going to access data, who is allowed to access data, what does this data mean, how do I get access to it? And again, the challenge that I've seen very closely, very recently in the past is this problem that a lot of data requests to the public sector are go to a website, hope you can find the right form, fill it in a Word document, maybe kind of attach some things in an Excel document, and then you send it off into the void of an email address and hope that something happens, right? You hope that something's going to come back. And I think that there's things that we can do better here. For some reason, that effect takes a while. What we're looking at here is Tablion is a new product that we're developing that I'll kind of show in a second that talks around how do people request information. It becomes a centralized point of access so that everybody who's trying to access data can go to one location, and that starts to drive notifications back to the people who actually hold that data. It becomes the portal that communication can happen through so that we can do those data requests in an effective fashion. It's not about querying the data, it's about being able to build that communication back to the data custodians to say, is this an appropriate request and can I access it? Fortunately, it doesn't leave our Aristotle in the background. Like, we've built this alongside of it. And it's designed to be partially an easy entry into the data management perspective. And for those people who are already using Aristotle, it becomes an effective way to kind of link them together. So we have Aristotle being that governance engine, which is where we describe our metadata and our data assets in a high quality way, with Tablion sitting as a secondary product that helps facilitate the access to the data that metadata records. So again, it's really about building that communication. And I've got some pretty sketchy metaphors to kind of drive this home. I love these. It's like click and collect. So everybody's used click and collect because of COVID. We all started to use click and collect. And it's very similar to that. So again, what we're not doing is we're not driving them to download anything. We're driving them to select the variables of interest and build baskets from that. So again, it's very much around that variable kind of access to say, can I request this information? And putting that metadata up front and using this as a kind of carrot to that approach to say, if you describe your data, people who are requesting it will actually understand it. It's about communication. As we said, as we heard in the panel, it's about communication. It's about saying, may I please have this data? I'm going to use it for these particular purposes. Can I do that? And then driving that and saying, well, yes, no, maybe you're going to have to provide more information. So it starts to become the way that we drive that channel. So that if somebody requests data in a way that is inappropriate, we just slam the close button and say, no, this is inappropriate for use. You are going to misinterpret this data, so I'm not going to provide it to you. And then lastly, and this is my last one here, it's about being able to do that secure access and identity management. Data requests are a very expensive activity. I think I saw that like some departments report weeks to fill these requests in and hundreds of dollars to even start doing a request. We know that the public service can't charge a profit for these services. So cost recovery, we know that the cost of entry for managing a data request is quite high. And a lot of that comes down to verification that a user is who they say they are. So what we're doing is, like we were saying before, is building a driver's license. Well, it's building a passport and saying, can you prove who you say you are so that I know that somebody's verified your identity so that I can verify that in future in a faster fashion. So the idea is that Tablion is the way that we're going to facilitate these data requests and close them or open them earlier before we give access to raw data. So that's my surprise. Like, that's my surprise. Big surprise. 4 years. We launched so that's a big surprise. It's like we're continuing to grow, and we're growing in a way that means that we're expanding this kind of product base in that direction, away from the data which is managed so effectively already into that direction of the people management and saying, how do we facilitate that communication so that people can understand it? So that's where you go. The website up already. We're starting. Oh, I should also probably say that just to give some credentials to this, and I think one or two of the people who are behind this are watching at the moment, is we've actually been co-developing this with a government partner in New South Wales. So we're not developing this on our own. We've actually been developing this with a partner from the New South Wales government, who's helping us kind of develop out a proof of concept to drive access to data. I believe that proof of concept is looking at going live in December or January. But again, through that co-design partnership, we've been able to take a lot of that IP and bring it to market for the federal government as well. So on that note, I'm going to close off and I say thank you very much. Thanks for coming, and thank you to all of our panelists for presenting. I'd also like to say, by the way, I think one thing that we should do is, I just wanted to say thank you to Andrew for not just hosting this, but hosting all of these throughout the entirety of the year, online and in person. So I wanted to say thank you for all of your service as a volunteer president of Dharma over the last year. And if there's one of that way is a bill present, we've got one from Lynton as well. But if there are any questions on Aristotle or what we've been doing for the last couple of years, please fire away.
Are you able to show the website?
Well, we can just go back one slide. Okay. Go back one slide. There we go. Any questions, or would people like to start having some drinks and some networking and some nibblies?
Where'd you get the name from?
What's the definition?
Did he ask you to ask that question?
No. This one's quite strange. We were searching, like, a lot of table names are taken. Like, you try and come up with fun startup name things that they're all taken. A tableon is a sash worn by Byzantine emperors that indicates status. And it was a really good name. And I'll let you figure this out. If you Google for a tableon, because I was searching to see if it was a name that existed, you'll search. You will find the image that this was based on, but I'm not going to let you know which one it is. So it is actually based on an image. Are there any questions online?
No, there's no questions online.
Any other questions?
So thank you, everybody. So remember the Dharma meeting on Thursday. There's an invite on the website. President's position vacant. Come on. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I think they're starting to bring in snacks and nibblies, so please network and meet your fellow startup people.
Yeah.
You were saying about life cycle stuff, like education outcomes. And,
Yeah, right, yeah.
I was doing some work with